Hello my friends, it is November the 28th of 2024. This video is entitled Albums to Listen to When You Are Sad. Okay, so basically these are albums that have a more depressive or melancholic type of sound to them. We all go through difficulties and challenges in our lives, and for some of us we do get depressed from time to time, and for some of us we do have some pretty significant mental health challenges, and so for many of us we do turn to music oftentimes to provide some relief from our depression and our anxieties. Okay, so I went through my vast collection of albums recently and I picked out 15 albums. I certainly could have picked out many more, but I have to limit myself, of course. So these are albums that I have a genuine connection with. These are albums that have helped me out a lot throughout the years in order to provide some relief from my difficulties. So I'm going to show you these albums and talk to you about them as well. Let's get into this. Up first is the Absolutely Essential Collection by Hank Williams. I suppose this may be somewhat of an unusual choice, but I do enjoy Hank Williams quite a bit. I like a lot of the more traditional or old style country music. I really don't like the pop country stuff that's on the radio. Yeah, I don't like that stuff whatsoever, but Hank Williams is just fantastic. His music is just full of so much heartbreak and sorrow. Lived such a tragic life as well, died at 29 years of age on January the 1st of 1953, I believe. Dealt with addiction and relationship issues and health issues, and you can certainly hear that in his music. It's just so deep and so emotional. Yeah, it's just full of so much pain. And yeah, I just have such a strong connection with his music, and yeah, I definitely recommend him. I'm sure most of you have heard of Hank Williams, but if you haven't really listened to his music, definitely give it a chance, and it's just fantastic. Okay, so that is the Absolutely Essential Collection by Hank Williams. Alice in Chains with Dirt. Yeah, this is a classic grunge album. I suppose that's what you would call it. Yeah, I remember listening to this album back in my early 20s. I think I was like 20 at the time, and I had purchased this album, and I was going through an especially difficult and isolating time in my life, and I remember just blasting this album oftentimes, and yeah, you can just hear the pain and the frustration within this music, because several of the members were dealing with very intense drug addictions at this point, especially Lane Staley, the vocalist. Yeah, you can really hear it in his lyrics, like songs like Down the River, which deals with addiction, and Sick Man. I mean, most of these songs, in fact, this entire album just deals with pain and addiction and anger and frustration, and yeah, it just, to me, it's just such a heartbreaking album, especially since Lane Staley would eventually pass away from drug addiction in 2002, I believe, April of 2002. Yeah, he lived such a tragic life, and you can certainly hear within the music of Alice in Chains, and yeah, I just have such a strong connection with this album. Played such an important role in my life, and I still love it so much. Okay, so that is Dirt by Alice in Chains. The Last Fair Deal Gone Down by Katatonia. I could have picked several other Katatonia albums as well. What a phenomenal band. One of my absolute favorite bands. One of my top 5 for sure. I just love Katatonia so much. I'm sure most of you are aware that I'm a big fan of them. And yeah, there's just so much melancholy within their music. It's just so deep and complex and emotional, their music. It just, yeah, I just have such a strong connection with their music. Most of their albums I really enjoy so much. This one especially, this is definitely one of my probably like top 3 albums from them. Really enjoy this one so much. And yeah, to me it's just such a sad and depressing album, this one especially. And yeah, great music right here, Katatonia. Definitely check this one out, give this one a listen. Okay, so that is The Last Fair Deal Gone Down by Katatonia. Damnation by Opeth. Yeah, Opeth have put out some pretty sorrowful music in the past. Their music has changed throughout the years, and I don't really have as much of a connection with their more recent albums, although they did just come out with a new album entitled The Last Will and Testament, and that album to me is just really good. Definitely a return to form, I would say, and I'm definitely looking forward to getting that album. I ordered it already, but yeah, so this album right here, Damnation, this is an older album of theirs, and yeah, this album especially, there's just so much melancholy within this album. I just have such a strong connection with it. Songs like Window Pane, In My Time of Need, Death Whispered a Lullaby, Hope Leaves. I mean, this album is just dripping with sadness and pain and sorrow. It's just such a dark sounding album. I just have such a strong connection with it, and it's one of the better Opeth albums in my opinion. I really do enjoy it so much. Opeth have other great albums, but this one is especially melancholic, I would say. And yeah, check this one out if you haven't. Great album right here. That's Damnation by Opeth. Halmstad by Shining. This is like a depressive black metal band, and really enjoy this album especially. I'm a big fan of Shining. I have most of their albums, but this one right here is especially good. And yeah, it took me a while to really get into this album. I actually owned this album for at least a few years, maybe 2 or 3 years, until I started to actually listen to it, and I just fell in love with it. And in fact, last winter around this time, I was just listening to this album obsessively. Just really got into it so heavily. It's just so bleak, so dark, and just so full of pain and madness. And yeah, Nicholas, the vocalist of this band, the main man behind Shining here, he's just such an unusual character that's just dealt with so much mental illness and addiction throughout his life. Such an interesting guy, and you can really hear his pain and his frustration within this music here. Yeah, it's really dark and depressive, this album. Some depressive black metal bands, they're kind of cringy, but some of them do it really well. Shining is one of those bands that does it really well, and really enjoy their music so much. So yeah, great album right here. Okay, so that is Halmstad by Shining. Home by The Gathering. Yeah, great band. Haven't really gotten that heavily into them, but I have always really enjoyed this album. This is one of those albums that I had gotten to back in my early 20s as well, when I was going through this very difficult and isolating time in my life. Yeah, and I purchased this album for whatever reason. I think I'd heard about this band from somebody and decided to purchase it, and I just fell in love with it. It's just, they have more of an electronic type of sound. It's hard to explain exactly, but I guess it's more kind of like an electronic rock, I suppose. It's, yeah, somewhat sort of like atmospheric rock, I suppose. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, great music, and it's just so mournful, these songs, and yeah, I just have such a deep connection with this music. Of course, it's very significant album for me, especially since it was an album I listened to during a very isolating and depressive time in my life. And yeah, I just have such a strong connection with these songs, especially songs like Shortest Day, Alone. Yeah, those songs especially. Really great album right here. So check this one out if you haven't. That is Home by The Gathering. Gray Skies and Electric Light by Woods of Ypres. This album I just absolutely love. It's a masterpiece. This would be one of my top 5 all-time favorite albums right here. I just love this album so much, and I've listened to this album a lot throughout the years. I actually have 2 copies of this on CD, and I do have it on vinyl. This album I got into back in 2012, okay? The fall of 2012. I was going through some pretty challenging times in my life. I had taken on a new job, and it was not working out so well. I was dealing with other challenges at home, at my apartment that I was living at the time. But yeah, it was a difficult time in my life, and this album, I purchased it and heard about it from a magazine, Terrorizer magazine. Actually, at this time, this band had disbanded because David Gold, the main man, had passed away shortly before this album had been released. He passed away in December of 2011. This album came out, I think, in February of 2012. So yeah, this band had already dissolved at this time, but yeah, I just fell in love with this music, and I just developed such a strong connection with it. It's just full of despair, and yeah, it's just such a sad album. It's just so deep and melancholic sounding. I just love this album so much. I can still listen to it oftentimes, and yeah, it just puts me in that depressive mood for sure. And definitely an album I go to oftentimes when I'm dealing with some difficulties in my life. Yeah, I just love this album so much. Absolute masterpiece right here. Okay, so that is Gray Skies and Electric Light by Woods of Ypres. Frank by Amy Winehouse. Yeah, I just love Amy Winehouse so much, and got into her music, I believe, I can't even recall exactly. I think I was around 25 at the time, so this would have been back in 2011. Yeah, I think it was the fall of 2011. She had actually passed away, I think July of 2011, I believe. So yeah, I got into her music after she had passed away, oddly enough. And yeah, a friend of mine at the time turned me on to her. Thought I would enjoy her music. I was going through some challenges at that time. And yeah, I just got so heavily into her music. And Amy Winehouse, of course, lived such a tragic life, dealt with so many mental health problems, addiction issues, relationship issues, and yeah, what an interesting person. And she released music that was just revealed so much about her difficulties and her struggles. And yeah, I just have such a strong connection with it. I mean, all the songs on this album are just absolutely amazing. This entire album is just it's just mind-blowing from start to finish. And yeah, I just love it so much. And yeah, what a dark sounding album, I'd say. Really enjoy this one. Okay, so that is Frank by Amy Winehouse. Watching from a Distance from Warning. That's actually what I'm listening to in the background right here. This is like a melancholic doom metal band, I suppose, if you want to call it that. I believe they are from England, and they aren't around any longer, I don't think. Although they have regrouped from time to time in order to play live, but they only released a couple of albums, and this one right here is just, it's a masterpiece. It's just full of just so much heartbreak and sorrow, and this album, it just plods along, and it's just slow and just has so much atmosphere. And yeah, it's just so dark and depressive sounding. And yeah, I just have such a connection with this album. I've been listening to this album for many years, and I know lots of other people really love this album. Just an absolute masterpiece, one of the greatest doom metal albums ever, absolutely ever. And yeah, great stuff right here. Okay, so that is Watching from a Distance from Warning. Melancholie by Coldworld. This is another depressive black metal band, a one-man black metal band from Germany. He's put out a bunch of albums. In my opinion, this definitely has to be one of his best for sure, if not his best. Really do enjoy this album so much. It's just so bleak sounding. It just creates this sort of wintry kind of feel to it. Just makes you feel like you're trapped out somewhere during the winter time and just complete isolation. It just creates that mood and I get that from this album for sure. An album I've been listening to for many years, and yeah, it's just so dark and depressive sounding. Yeah, good album to listen to, especially during winter, I would say. And yeah, it just has that winter mood to it. But yeah, great band that really does that depressive black metal style really well. Other bands within the depressive black metal scene aren't particularly good in my opinion, but Coldworld do that sound especially well. So yeah, definitely check this one out if you haven't. That is Melancholie by Coldworld. In Utero by Nirvana. Okay, so yeah, I got into Nirvana I believe when I was around 10 or 11 years of age, and yeah, I just fell in love with their music. This would have been around 1997, so Nirvana hadn't been a band any longer for about 3 years, because they disbanded after the death of Kurt Cobain in 1994, April of 1994, when he had ended his life. And this is their last album that they had released. This came out, I believe, in October, or maybe it was, I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, I think it was October of 1993. And yeah, it's just their most darkest sounding album for sure. Yeah, there's just so much sadness within these songs, and you can tell Kurt Cobain was definitely going through a lot of challenges and difficulties. So he, of course, had been dealing with so many mental health problems, addiction, of course, and unfortunately, yeah, he ended his life in April of 1994. And so yeah, this would have been their final album. Yeah, you can definitely hear so much darkness and sadness within these songs. And yeah, I just fell in love with Nirvana when I was around 11 or 12. Definitely that band, I just, you know, I really connected with their music so much, and really enjoy their music still, you know, all these years later. Okay, so that would be In Utero by Nirvana. So Long Suckers by Reverend Bizarre. This is a Finnish doom metal band, no longer around. This is their last album that they had released, and what an amazing band they were. Unfortunately, yeah, they are no longer around. There were some tensions within the band, so they decided to split. That's why they entitled this album So Long Suckers. This is their farewell album. Definitely their darkest sounding album as well. I mean, you have songs in here like Sorrow and Funeral Summer. I mean, it's quite bleak, these songs, and definitely some of the most darkest and depressive doom metal I've ever heard. I just love this album so much. I've really connected with this album so much throughout the years, and this band in general. To me, they did things that were just phenomenal within the doom metal scene, and fortunately are no longer around, but yeah, they definitely put out a lot of great albums. Okay, so yeah, give this one a listen if you haven't. That is So Long Suckers by Reverend Bizarre. Nola by Down. Yeah, so I've had this album since I was, I think, like 15 years old. So I've had this album for quite a long time, and yeah, it's pretty dark, this album, I would say. Definitely their darkest album that they ever released. I mean, Phil Anselmo at the time, he of course is the vocalist for Down, was dealing with a lot of health problems and addiction issues, and yeah, just you can really hear within these songs. There's lots of songs about addiction and depression. Songs like Temptation's Wings, Pillars of Eternity, Hail the Leaf, you know, Losing All, Swan Song. I think it's especially dark. Yeah, I really connected with this album throughout the years, and yeah, it's quite sorrowful, this album. And yeah, check this one out if you haven't. Okay, so that is Nola by Down. The Haunting Presence by Crom. This is another depressive black metal band out of the US, one-man band. Yeah, he put out a couple of albums and a few demos, and yeah, hasn't put out anything in many years, so I think he's disbanded. But yeah, this album right here is just absolutely incredible. There's just something about this album that's just mind-blowing. It just creates this atmosphere that I just connect with so much. There's just so much frustration and sadness and despair within these songs, and yeah, it just pulls you into this other world. Yeah, it's a great album. I really enjoyed it so much. Just creates that feeling of isolation that I just love so much. Yeah, I've really connected with this album a lot throughout the years. Okay, so that is The Haunting Presence by Krohm. And the last album on my list here is A Misleading Reality by Nocturnal Poisoning. So this is essentially the band Xasthur. Scott Connery, he had disbanded Xasthur some years ago, and then he formed this group, Nocturnal Poisoning, because he wanted to move into a different direction apart from the more black metal sounds that he had been doing previously. And so yeah, he went to more of a dark folk type of direction. Of course, he changed the name to Nocturnal Poisoning, would later change it back to Xasthur again, and he's done some more black metal stuff since, but he's a bit more varied within his style now. But this album is just like very dark folk music, and yeah, last winter, in fact, I was listening to this album a lot. I mean, for several weeks on end, I was just listening to this album every day, and I just connected with it so deeply. There's just so much sadness and despair within these songs, and yeah, he just does an incredible job of that, and there's just something truly unique about that man and what he's able to do. And yeah, I just love this album so much. Just it's absolutely mind-blowing, this entire album. Yeah, it's really do enjoy it so much. Yeah, okay, so that is the final album here. Okay, so that is A Misleading Reality by Nocturnal Poisoning. Okay, so that is my list of albums to listen to when you are sad. These are albums I have a genuine love of. These are albums I've listened to a great deal during those depressive times in my life. And I think you should check some of these out. I will leave a list of these albums in the description, and please tell me what some albums you listen to during those depressive times in your lives. I'm very curious to know, so please leave some comments. Give me a like, and please subscribe to my channel if you don't. And yeah, so I want to say thank you very much for watching, and I want to say thanks to all the people who watch my videos and subscribe to my channel. I really truly appreciate it. Take care, my friends. Cheers.